Today, this guy in the picture on the left-hand side, whose name is Adolf Anderssen. And Anderssen was one of the most famous chess players of all time. He was the world champion, or not the world champion because there was no official title of world champion in those days, but he was the best player in the world from the year 1851 until at least 1858 when Paul Morphy overtook him. He got that title or that recognition as being the best player in the world from a tournament that he played in London in 1851. It was the very first international chess tournament, and a guy called Howard Staunton, who was organising the tournament in London, collected together all the best chess players from all over Europe. There wasn't many good chess players anywhere other than Europe in those days, but collected all the best chess players from all over the world that he could find and organised this big tournament in London in 1851. Adolf Anderssen, the guy you can see on the left-hand side there, I'll give you another picture of Anderssen here. Anderssen was a school teacher. He was a mathematics teacher in a school in Germany, and he didn't have a huge amount of money. And in those days, it was quite expensive to travel. There were no aeroplanes, so you'd have to take trains and wagons and carts and then a boat across from France to England to play, and eventually get to London to play in this tournament. Quite a trip. So initially, when Anderssen was invited, he declined the offer to come and play in the tournament because it was just too expensive for him to go. He couldn't afford to take the time off teaching, plus the cost of all of the tickets. As teachers probably today are a bit underpaid, teachers in those days were underpaid still. So the organiser of the tournament, Howard Staunton, said, well, we've seen some of your games, we've seen how good a player you are, we think you're going to do really well, we really want you to come and play in this tournament, we need this to be the best players in the world. And so Howard Staunton actually offered to pay for Anderssen's trip across to London. And he said, well, look, if you win a prize, then you can pay us back for for the money that we've spent on your ticket. But if you don't win a prize, well, we'll just pay you away. So Anderssen came across, played in the tournament, ended up winning the tournament, and he won what in today's money would be something like $400,000, and paid back all of the people who'd helped him out with his ticket, and actually more than half of the money he gave away to various charities and people who'd actually supported him in his chess career. So it was an extremely generous sort of guy. After he won that tournament, he was recognised as the best player in the world. So we're going to look today at a game that Adolf Anderssen played. And this game was on his trip on the way home. He'd just returned back to Germany. This was played in Berlin in 1852. So he'd just come back from winning this very first international chess tournament. He was recognised as the best player in the world, but he went back home and continued teaching as a maths teacher at school, continued on in that respect, and chess was always just a hobby for him. He saw it as something he enjoyed and loved doing, but it wasn't going to be his profession. And when he got to Berlin, nearly home, he played this game against a French guy called Dufresne. And occasionally, very occasionally, maybe one in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of games, there is a game that's played that is so good and so exciting that the game itself actually gets given a name. And so this game here is known as the Evergreen Game, because when people saw the moves of this game, they were like, wow, that is just brilliant, amazing, attacking game, what a great game. This is going to be a great game for all of history. And well, we're more than 150 years past that time, and still today, when you see this game, you think, wow, that is a great game. And it's truly an evergreen game, which means that it's, evergreen trees are green all the time. They never die. Their leaves never die, and this is an evergreen game. It's always going to be seen as a brilliant game. So let's get into the opening here. Anderssen is white, and he starts off with his first move, pawn to e4, controlling the centre of the board. Dufresne replies with his pawn as well, and then Anderssen brings his knight off the back row into the attack. Now, what you'll notice is interesting. In this day, in 1852, when this was played, the three golden rules hadn't yet been invented. So the three golden rules that we always talk about today: control the center of the board, develop your pieces, and castle. Those are the three golden rules. We talk about them today as if like they're the most important things and the simplest things to learn, which they are. But back here in 1852, Paul Morphy wasn't around yet. He hadn't invented those three golden rules. It wasn't for another 6 more years until those rules were invented. So in those days, really, only 2 of the 3 golden rules had been invented. So they knew about controlling the center of the board and how good that was. They knew about getting pieces off the back row and into the attack. But castling was like, yeah, we might not bother to castle depending on how the game goes. So you'll be interested to see this game, how it worked before the 3 golden rules were even invented. All right, Dufresne develops his knight, then they both get their bishops developed, and you can see development is probably getting pieces off the back row, which is what development is, all these pieces along the back row. Bringing them off the back row into the attack is probably the most important thing for the players in those days. So in this position here, it seems to be pretty evenly matched. Anderssen comes up with this move here, which we call the Evans Gambit, which was named after an American grandmaster called Larry Evans. And the idea was that he would move his pawn forwards here, let the bishop take that. Right? If the bishop takes the pawn, or the knight takes the pawn, then, well, I guess if the knight takes the pawn, this pawn in the middle of the board is going to be undefended. If the bishop takes the pawn, then we can start attacking that bishop, and the hope is that get more control over the center, get more pieces developed into the attack, and even if you have to sacrifice a pawn for doing that, it's worthwhile. So Dufresne replies with bishop takes pawn, not wanting to take back with the knight and leave his pawn on e5 unprotected, rather to take back with the bishop. And in those days, like these days, you might just retreat your bishop. You're attacked, you retreat your bishop. But in those days, you really had to take on the challenge. So if it's like, well, there's a pawn, I can take it, I'm not going to lose straight away, then you would sort of accept that challenge and go, all right, I'll take that, and let's see if I can hold on to the pawn and give me a chance of winning this game. So Anderssen now plays pawn to c3, using his pawn to attack the bishop, and then next move, his pawn that's in the middle of the board, d4, pawn's going to be able to go up to d4, and he'll have his 2 pawns in the center of the board, and he'll have protection from that pawn on c3. So that's why he's doing pawn to c3, to give his pawn a bit of extra backup when he moves into the center of the board. Bishop retreats, and there we go. You've got your 2 pawns next to each other in the center. You've got the wall of pawns. If black takes, which is what happens, white's hoping that happens to try and get black's pawn away from the center. So he's really just focused on trying to get pieces off the back row and into the attack as quick as he possibly can. Anderssen plays the move castling to get his king nice and safe. Probably when he played that move, he wasn't thinking of it so much as getting his king safe as bringing his rook into the attack, because he really wants to use this rook and get that rook across, maybe across onto e1 and then down towards the king, and get his rook into the most attacking position he can hope for. So castling, not necessarily, I mean, it's obviously a good move to get your king safe behind the pawns, but Anderssen probably wasn't thinking about it as being a way of getting his king safe. He's probably more focused on how can he get his rook into the attack. Now, there's a couple of choices here for black. Black could use his pawn in the middle of the board to take white. He could just develop his pawn forwards here and get his bishop off the back row into the attack. But he chose to advance his pawn forwards. And the idea is that he wants, for example, the queen or the bishop to take that pawn. And if the bishop takes the pawn, then the bishop's sort of retreating. Bishop takes the pawn, it's retreating, and now the bishop's blocked in behind a pawn, and it's not really in the best possible spot. The bishop, where it is at the moment, is in an excellent position because it's aiming down towards what we know as the weak spot, right near black's king. So that's going to be in a very threatening position. So black's advancing a pawn, hoping it's going to get taken by the queen or the bishop, and then that's going to sort of slow down white's development. White won't be able to get his pieces off the back row and into the attack in their best positions as quickly as what he might like. Anderssen just ignored it though. He's like, well, I sacrificed the pawn for a reason. It's because I don't want that pawn. I want to get all my pieces into the attack. So he brings his queen off the back row and into the attack. And we can see now white's got queen, bishop, knight. 3 pieces off the back row and into the attack. Okay, black's only got 2, just the knight and the bishop. So it seems like, oh yeah, white's just a little bit ahead. But if we look at the fact that this bishop can easily come off the back row and into the attack, his rook has only got another move or 2, and then his rook's going to be in the attack. And even this knight can come off the back row one of those 2 directions. So it's really easy for all of white's pieces to get into the attack, even though he's only got 3 pieces developed at the moment. And if you look at black's bishop, black's queen, black's knight, which are all still sitting on the back row, they're going to find it a little bit more difficult to come off the back row and into the attack. Right? They're going to be blocked in by their own pieces a little bit more. So that's what white's counting on, is to have his pieces in the attack more quickly and therefore get a better attack going. Okay, queen to f6, using his queen to defend the weak spot. Right? So the pawn here, we've got white's queen and bishop both attacking towards the pawn. So black's using his queen to come up and protect that pawn. And white now starts an attack on the queen. Right? Queen's out in the open. He puts up a bit of a threat. It looks like, well, hang on a second, there's a knight and a queen, 2 pieces could take that, and only 1 piece, the knight, is protecting it. But if the knight takes the pawn and the knight takes the knight and then the queen takes the knight, even though black's won a pawn, white's got the next move, bishop takes pawn, check, and black's king now has to move, can't castle anymore. It also puts the queen and the king in the same row as one another, so if white's rook comes across just 1 step, he's going to be able to do a pin and win his queen. So it's going to be very dangerous if black takes that pawn. Pawns are great defenders, but they work both ways. They're good defences, so for white's king it's great to have those pawns in front of his king, but this pawn on e5 is actually a good defender for black's king. So defence works both ways. That pawn is good for defence for black, it's good for defence for white. It stops white's rook from coming through into the attack. That's why black doesn't want to take it, just moves his queen out of the way, keeps his queen protecting the weak spot, doesn't open up that E file so that there's no open file that can attack down towards black's king, and black's not going to be in all that much trouble. Alright, white plays now rook e1. Like we said before, when he castled, he wanted to try and get his rook into the attack, and now this is a great spot for the rook, heading straight down towards the king. If only you can get rid of that pawn. Right? Now, of course, now you can see it would have been great for white if black had taken the pawn. Black develops another piece off the back row, and white plays bishop a3. So every single move that white's doing is trying to get more pieces into the attack. That's the main focus for him. He's now got his bishop, his queen, his knight, his other bishop, and his rook. So we've got 5 pieces off the back row and all poised in good attacking positions. The other thing that we've got is Anderssen in the centre of the board. Those 4 squares in the middle of the board. Anderssen's got his pawn, black's got nothing. So we can see that this position is much better for white. Doesn't mean that white's going to win this game, but he does have a better position at the moment. Got more pieces developed, better control over the centre of the board, and his king's castle, so he's a little bit safer. Black's finding it difficult to get this bishop off the back row into the attack. If he moves this pawn forwards from d7, white takes it, and then that opens up the file for the rook. So black tries an interesting move, pawn to b5, sacrificing the pawn to get the bishop into the attack. A little bit like what white did on the 4th move of the game, sacrificing a pawn to get the bishop into the attack a bit more. So an interesting sacrifice attempt. Queen takes it. Rook comes across 1 step, which is a threat now on the queen, so it's a good attacking move, developing a piece and threatening the queen, putting the queen in danger. White has to get the queen safe, so just retreats the queen out of the way. Bishop retreats here, aiming the bishop towards white's weak spot. Knight develops, bishop develops, and then knight goes into the centre of the board. So there's only 1 piece left, that's this rook on a1 that white hasn't yet got into the attack. Black's got most of his pieces developed now, which is good. He's got the bishops, the knights, even the rooks on an open file, and the queen's over there pointing towards the king. But because White's got so much control over the centre of the board, right, he's dominating those 4 squares in the middle of the board. He's got a pawn and a knight there, and Black's got nothing. Black's pieces find it very difficult to coordinate together for an attack in any area. Right, that centre is very strong, because if you can control the centre, we've controlled those 4 squares there. White can attack left, right, straight ahead, wherever you like. Okay, so White's got lots of choices where to attack, but Black, on the other hand, a little bit harder for Black. Right? Black's got some pieces here, some here, and to get anywhere, because he can't go through the centre of the board because it's covered by White, he's got to go all the way around. So it takes a lot longer for for Black's pieces to all coordinate together in an attack, because White's got more control over the centre of the board, those 4 squares. All right, Black's next move was maybe his mistake for the game. He plays Queen F5. Yeah, sort of threatening to take that pawn on E5, but not really. Now the bishop retreats, not to take the pawn, right, because we already know Anderssen didn't care about having that pawn. He's retreating his bishop here because he wants his bishop in the same line as the queen. All right, so that's going to put the bishop heading towards the queen if White can move his knight out of the way. So just have a bit of a think for a second and tell me, what do you think White's next move would be if Black just does nothing? All right, so what would White's next move be if he doesn't do anything at all? All right, there's a few seconds to think about that. What's White's next move going to be? And we've got a couple of good moves, and yep, Joy seems to have got the right one. We've got the next move that White's going to do is this knight is going to go up to D6, which is going to give Black a check, and Black's in check, got to move his king out of check, and then the bishop is free to come through and take Black's queen. So that's going to be what we call a discovered attack, where the knight moves out of the way, does a check, and then, oh, look at that, we've just discovered the bishop's ready to take the queen. All right, so excellent work if you saw knight D6 check, and then winning Black's queen. Unfortunately for Anderssen, Black saw it as well, and he just moved his queen out of the way, put his queen onto the edge of the board, and here Anderssen spent a bit of time and came up with one of the most brilliant moves of all time. He's put his knight into F6 and said check. Now, this is first of all a fork. The knight's attacking the king, knight's attacking the queen at the same time. So we call that a fork, 2 pieces attacked at the same time. As well as being a fork, right, he knows that he can just get taken. Right? Black's pawn's just going to take him. There's no doubt about that. So he knows that's going to happen, and that was a deliberate sacrifice. He wanted his knight to be taken. Right? He sort of forced it to be taken because it was a fork. He was going to win the queen if it didn't get taken, because now, when he does pawn takes pawn, he's created an open file for his rook. So what he's doing there is he's getting rid of that pawn that we saw at the start that Black didn't want to take, because now that opens up a way for the rook to come right through and into the attack. Okay, Black's king's in the middle of the board, looking like it's a bit of a problem with that rook lined up right against him. So Black plays rook G8. Not really much you can do about the rook attacking the king. It's what it is. So he tries to play rook to G8 and get an attack going of his own. Right. So now his rook's coming down the king's side here towards there. Maybe the queen's going to come in, or the queen's going to come in and then go for a checkmate with that rook and queen on the king's side. Okay, so that's Black's hope of counterattack. This move should get an exclamation mark, and an exclamation mark is an excellent move. Right? That's the way that we describe an excellent move when you're writing it down, is you write an exclamation mark next to the move. And this move is definitely worth an exclamation mark, because what he's doing is he's bringing his last rook into the attack, and he's going to have his rooks, both of them, lined up on a half-open file here, an open file here, aiming down straight towards black's king. And black's king's locked in the middle of the board. Remember we said at the start that in those days the 3 golden rules didn't invent. The one that was missing was castling. Right? And black's not castled, and his king is going to be in a lot of trouble. Right? Because white's castled, his king's a lot safer. Black's rooks are in attacking positions on the open files, but it's not going to be enough because the 2 rooks in the centre of the board are much more powerful. The middle is always more powerful than the edge. All right, the other reason that rook to d1 was a great move is because it's sacrifice. Right? Black can take that knight free, right? And it's not a blunder. It's not that Anderssen didn't see that move. He definitely saw that coming. He saw, oh yeah, I can't take that with my pawn because the rook's going to get me in check. He definitely saw that coming. Right? He didn't want his knight. He wanted the queen to take him because he'd actually planned out some pretty amazing attacks going for a checkmate attack towards black's king. And he's got to be quick about it because otherwise queen comes to take the pawn and black's going to have checkmate next move. So white's got to get a really quick, strong, powerful attack going to try and win this game before black does. So the first move, rook takes e7 check. Okay, a sacrifice of a rook for a knight, but getting rid of all the pieces that are around black's king, protecting him. There's 2 choices. Black could have moved his king out of the way, and then this doesn't look very nice. There's check, and the king's open. There's going to be check. And just here, just to show you the check, this rook can't really take that because then the queen's open. So black's rook on g8 needs to stay there to keep that pawn in check, to keep the pawn pinned so that the pawn can't take the queen. So it is, yeah, this is going to be pretty dismal. So instead, black plays knight takes e7, which is the most obvious move. Obvious move, but is going to end up with an amazing checkmate here. Now, this move is like lightning coming from a blue sky. It's possible, but very rare and totally unexpected. So white's next move here, I'll give you a second or two to think about it, but there is no way that you're going to see this move coming. This is completely unexpected, amazing move. There is good, sound strategic principles behind it. He wants to try and open up black's king more, get rid of the things like the pawns and the knights, but particularly pawns which are protecting the king, get him open so he can do a checkmate. And the way that he did it was queen takes pawn. And yeah, thanks for the suggestions, for those of you who made some suggestions, but I certainly wouldn't have expected you to guess this one, and that is an amazing move. Queen takes pawn, check, and black is like, whoa, you've just taken a pawn, the weakest piece, with the queen, the best piece, and you're just letting me take you back. It's a free queen. Why not? There's really not much choice anyway, because if black tries to move his king across, then queen takes knight's going to be checkmate. So it's like, well, there's no choice, and why wouldn't I take that? Looks like, if you looked at this position the first time, you'd think black's won for sure, because next move, queen takes pawn, is checkmate. Right? Black's got, rooks protecting each other, that's good. He's got 3-4 pieces off the back row attacking. Everything seems to be working well, but white's got this this amazing checkmate that comes. So bishop f5 check. King can't go forwards because can't take the bishop. This is what we call a double check. Okay, here we've got a double check. We've got the bishop putting the king in check and the rook putting the king in check. So if the queen takes the rook, can't do it, it's check with the bishop. If the queen takes the bishop, can't do it, it's check with the rook. If the knight tries to take the bishop, can't do it, it's check with the rook. Can't block. So if you can't take, you can't block. The only thing that black can do is to run away. If he moves his king forwards to c6, bishop down there is checkmate next move. So the only thing that black can do is to retreat his king. Okay, get his king out of the way and hope that he can get his king behind a pawn perhaps and remain safe for the rest of the game. So bishop check. King's got to move again. He can choose to go either to the left to d or to the right to f, and it doesn't really make a difference which way he goes. After king to f8, who can see what white's next move is going to be to deliver a checkmate? Right, with that instant, with, 4 moves, sacrifices his queen, king's open, and then boom boom with his bishops and his rooks, and does a checkmate. and we've got Matthew and George and Sarah have got correct moves and no other ones. All right, well, the move that we play is bishop takes knight and a beautiful checkmate. The bishop's protected by the pawn. The pawn covers the escape square if black tries to go to the right, to g7. Black can't go to the left, to e8, because white's bishop's got him covered, and that is an extraordinary checkmate, sacrificing first the rook, then the queen, and then he moves in with his bishops and does a very rare and an extraordinary bishop checkmate, because black's king locked in the middle of the board. I mean, yeah, it's checkmate next move. Queen can take the pawn as checkmate. It's just you're too slow. You're one move behind. You're already in checkmate. You're not allowed to do a move when you're in checkmate. So black, even though it was very close to that, white's great attack at the end just finished that game off. So I think the main things to think about and learn from in that game is that black's king didn't castle, right? Because white castled, he's just had that extra move of defense up his sleeve, so he got his king a bit safer. Black has not castled, king's still out sort of in the middle of the board, and those bishops come in and easily checkmate him. The other thing that white did was just really dominated the center of the board. Always had 2, 3, 4 pieces more than his opponent in the center of the board. Right? Black never really had anything in the middle. All his pieces are on the edge, pointing through the middle towards the sides. But that's not nearly as powerful as actually being in the center of the board. If you're in the center, that's your most powerful strategy. So yeah, some interesting strategies that we saw in this game. And yeah, that was a great win for Anderssen, who was the best player in the world from 1851 to 1858. So I'm going to be sticking around again to answer some questions. If people have got some questions about Anderssen or about the game or about chess in general, or if you'd like to give us some feedback about some other lessons that you'd like to do or particular topics that you'd like to cover, we're more than happy to cover some of those sessions. Just let me know what it is that you're after and we'll try and get that happening. Thanks again to Chess Kids for sponsoring these webinars and enabling them to come out to you live every Tuesday. And we look